My name is Kurt Williams, and I'm going to be talking about strategic management at the Ford Motor Company, what the Ford Motor Company can do um, to get into a better position. And we'll talk about the difficult position it is in now. We'll start with history. Founded in 1903 by Henry Ford, who was inspired by working at the docks and seeing steam engines in the first and second industrial revolutions. And he eventually came came to Ford with the ideas of that he learned while he was working in the real world assembly lines. He was one of the first employers to start time cards, and really that made him known as a taskmaster. But people were paid well, and he had a lot of savings by using the assembly line, and that made it so that the middle class was able to afford some of the cars that he was coming out with, which was a huge time. It's about 110 plants in all 6 continents, and most of them are in China, the United States, and Germany. Ford owns the Lincoln brand. It used to have Jaguar, Aston Martin, and Mazda, but they sold off those assets and more. Ford Financial is also a huge part of the company. It generates about $3.8 billion a year, and they have about 3,000 dealerships in the United States. And so, Ethisphere, it since 2007, they have rated the most ethical companies in the world, and Ford was on that list from 2010 to 2017. They did not make it in 2018, but if you look at other car companies in the entire world, BMW, Toyota, and Honda are the only ones to appear, and they've only Ford to be on it 8 years in a row is really something out of. And that's a big turn from their past ethical issues because there were several that really are forever going to be linked with Ford. And one is the anti Semitism of their founder, Henry Ford. He owned a paper, the Dearborn Independent, which had the widest circulation in the United States, and he would write anti Semitic columns. Those columns and other writings were compiled into 4 volumes that really appeared in one of Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, one of his movies. Hitler had a life-size portrait of Henry Ford in his Munich office, and that Ford can never get away from because their founder is the one who felt, this way. And the Ford Pinto is another textbook example of business ethics gone bad. Ford Pinto had fire dangers because their tank in the back was supposed to be able to withstand a 30-mile-an-hour hit. In 1971, 1972, that their cars were not going to be able to withstand those, and that the fire for $11 per. They chose they decided on a cost benefit analysis run with people's lives. They decided that it's worth it to just let this go. So instead of and that was not just 1 year. They knew in the beginning, 1971, that this car was going to explode in flames if it got hit from behind. It wasn't until 1978 that they decided to recall all those cars and the previous editions. So they continued with the flawed model of the car. So obviously, what resulted is Minto is a huge ethical lapse in Ford's history. Looking at the 5 forces with the auto industry, rivalries come from GM, who has the most market share. Ford has the second highest, and Toyota is the third. Competition for cars that are really accessible to all consumers is not easy to just start your own car company, especially with the billions of dollars that these companies are operating with annually. It would be virtually impossible to make a company compete with those. There are alternative options that are growing: bicycles, electric cars, electric scooters, or even electric bikes. Things like that are coming on board, and people are moving metropolises where they can walk or use light rail. So these alternative options are something that is becoming something that Ford and other competitors are having to look out for and really develop on their own, because the power in this market lies definitely with the customers, because there are so many rivals in the industry to extend warranties or lower prices or create sales, so the customers will, or innovate, so the customers will come into the door and buy their car and not someone else's car. And suppliers don't have bargaining power in this industry, because suppliers really are in business because they operate in the auto industry. If they weren't in the auto industry, they would really be out of business. So this map shows cost per car by manufacturer, and the size of the circle represents the size of the market share. So GM is over here with the biggest market share, and then you have Ford right next to it. You can see that their costs are just a little bit lower. So this graph really was to see, does the company that has the lowest cost, in this case Honda, do they have the highest, are they able to undercut the market essentially because they have low cost? Well, you see that the answer is no. And Nissan also has relatively low cost, but they have also a relatively low share. So really there's an inverse relationship between cost of the average car and market share. And these are some of the external factors that Ford is having to deal with. Some opportunities, low employment. That's the low employment numbers that we're continuing to see. Corporate tax cut, the regulations that are being relaxed, and as far as instability, threats, tariffs, oil instability is always something in oil. Before I wrote this, oil was doing well, but now oil is really high for customers. Flat auto sales overall, and erratic politics that really are a lot of businesses right now. And for these, we're cross-referencing the external factors with the internal factors and seeing what strategies we might be able to come up with. And while you can read those, the one thing that we're going to look at is the weakness, which is the debt, and the opportunities. So if you remember the opportunities, well, the opportunities are coming up, but one thing is that using tax cuts that are coming for corporations. And one of the things that the biggest strategy that we came up with is to pay off debts, because debts are huge right now, and we'll see that on this next slide that right here that Ford's bond status is next to junk, which means that it's going to be harder and harder to get debt and to get loans, excuse me, and the more we increase debt, the more we're going to see Ford having to rely on other sources of income, and again, with the economy that is sort of teetering at the moment, it's going to be very hard to come back from a situation if the market were to crash. People do see coming. This is a space matrix of all these companies are in the competitive and aggressive side, but you see that GM has the biggest market share, so they're the farthest to the right. Toyota has the best financial situation, so they're above, and Ford is in between both. And now we look at financials. Ford, their operating margin profit is in dollars a year, so it's not a small company at all. And here you see the stock chart. It's been going down for the last 3 years. Ford from 2015 to 2016 went down in almost all aspects, and then 2016 to 2017 went up in almost all aspects. And moving forward, we're thinking of will lower expectations. These are forecasted with those expectations in mind, but the strategy that we choose will be financially prudent, fiscally conservative, and it'll offer protection. And the strategies we recommend are going to be fiscally conservative, that you take potential short-term losses, but you gain long-term stability. We see that there is a situation that could be to the 2008 crisis, where all the auto companies were in really bad situation and had to be helped out by, with the shaky financial and political status right now, we just feel that it's really prudent for Ford to consolidate as much as possible to save, look at accounts receivable, try to collect as much as they can, really, so that they're able to weather a potential storm. A lot of people think that there's a housing bubble that's about to pop, and if that were to happen, we just want Ford to be on better footing. And we also think that benchmarking would be a key issue for Ford as well, because the Japanese cars are making cars for a lot less. If you look at companies like Toshiba or other electronics companies from Japan, we think there, for that matter, that there would be good opportunities to find better ways of operating. So these are more of the forecasted financials. So you'll see that from 2017, where we have the most recent numbers, going to 2018, we would see a drop in operating profit, a drop in working capital. Um, but really, the biggest number that we want to see drop is the long-term debt to equity ratio. That's going to be the most meaningful change um, for Ford if they're going to actually be paying off their debts. And the lower that long-term debt to equity ratio goes down, the better the bond status is going to be, and the better that Ford is going to be in the long term if an economic collapse were to happen again. And again, a lot of people think that may be happening soon. And also to monitor the interest and tax year over year, they want to ensure that if Ford is in a better position, that they not only are paying off that debt, but they have money to pay off that debt. So that means keeping more of their money, selling more, but also working in production to try to save more money and just again consolidate as much as possible so that we're able to weather any potential storm coming in the next year or two. And these are references for you very much.